if we are looking at the numbers, because we've got used to 16-17% increase every year from 2020, and saying, oh, you have not increased it by that number, I would equally want to ask you to please look at the way in which the quality of spending has happened, particularly capital expenditure. And I must appreciate the states which received the 50-year interest-free share of the money, which went from our side as capital expenditure for them. They have also shown very great interest in capital expenditure, and the quality of expenditure therefore has been very good. At the same time, last year when we touched 11.11, this year, building on it, it is about 10.1 over the RE, which is far more realistic. And 1 year, 2024, has had the difficulty of elections happening. Difficulty, I say, from the point of view of capital expenditure. Elections are very much a necessity and also very due democratic process. Yeah. But during that year, the election year, which we've just completed, the capital expenditure did go a bit slow. Otherwise, my RE would have also been closer to the number given. I think many people who are just outside of the fringe should be nudged to come in, who have never been taxpayers or who have now reached that level of income, or even those who have avoided tax will all have to be brought on. So that is certainly a task before us. We'll have to make sure that people are understanding the role of paying tax and bring them on board. It is the budget which the people wanted. It is the budget, as they say in democracy, I think it's Abraham Lincoln's words, it is a budget by the people, of the people, for the people. I wouldn't want to predict something, but certainly this tax proposal will make people have more money in their hands. When people have money in their hands, they make their judgment about whether they want to spend it entirely or spend some out of it, and also make sure that they save something else, some amount from it. So I expect this would show both in terms of the consumption spending and also in terms of the savings, which can be through very many different instruments, but both will be influenced. But I wouldn't want to directly say this is the only way we are looking at growing up to 8%. These are steps which will have implications for the near term and the medium term future. So many other things also will have to simultaneously happen, which we are clearly indicating in the budget part A, through which I think India will open up so many more avenues for its growth trajectory, and those and their collaterals, or those and their secondary effects, will certainly ensure that we'll move towards it. This kind of a challenging situation, having borrowed the amounts that we borrowed during COVID, facing all the global challenges, increased questions on, let us say, container movement, globalized supply chain problems, and also Red Sea problems. Despite all this, we have shown a commitment and following the commitment to the last word in as regards the fiscal deficit maintenance and the glide path that we should follow. We've not 1 year have we failed. Equally, to give a long-term perspective, we've even said that we will manage our debt in such a way that the debt to GDP ratio will be continuously followed, and that report which was submitted earlier on bringing the debt down, it was N.K. Singh committee, I think, debt coming down in relation to the GDP. We volunteered to say we'll manage our debt from the last year itself, we said that, from now, so that it will come down to the level which was recommended by that committee. These are steps which many of the advanced nations themselves are not doing. I'm not comparing my size with any advanced country. But in terms of the principle, cutting down your debt to GDP, maintaining a fiscal deficit. These are relentlessly being followed, and here I will hasten to add, without any negative impact on social welfare schemes, education or health, or even the public expenditure which is so necessary to trigger growth. The capital expenditure has not come down, but even with all this, we are following the two cardinal principles, to keep your fiscal deficit and also to borrow only for meaningful capital expenditure. I was accused of always being conservative in my estimates. And I've every time said our numbers are realistic because we do a lot of, prior to announcing in the budget the numbers, we do a lot of work and understand that we are definitely not exaggerating our targets. At the same time, we do not want to underestimate it and for domain experts later on to say, oh, you've underestimated today, you're performing this much, it's not great. We've always shown realistic numbers. Strongly feel that states and states' capacity to take on such welfare measures will have to be studied before announcing any such. And I strongly believe such a homework is done by BJP-ruled states, and only then do they announce it, because you take the example of any number of states which were BJP-ruled, and while going to the elections, they have come up with solutions, such solutions. They have been budgetarily provided for. Unlike, I'm sorry to take one or two states examples, I'm not even naming them, they gave, very big promises, and their budget today is not even able to fund those promises.
You're talking about Punjab?
Himachal Pradesh, Karnataka. States which have had fairly good financial fiscal situation are also now reaching situations which they are not able to fund themselves. And if the assembly doesn't pass it, or if assembly passes because they have good majority, also will you look at intergenerational burden that they are putting on, which your current generation cannot bear, but you're passing it by borrowing money and putting it on to the next generation. People immediately also say, oh, the central government's borrowing is also, yes, during COVID we borrowed big sums. But haven't we, in the last budget, which is July budget, very clearly showed an indication that we want to bring the debt to GDP down. And in this budget, I've given a framework for it to show how by 2030, we will bring India's GDP, debt to GDP down to close to 50%, plus minus 1%. A couple of things which have been in the works for some time. One is the thought that the direct tax should be made simple and that it should be easy for compliance. And the tome that goes in the name of direct taxation or Income Tax Act will have to be a lot more simpler. So that work, as I announced in the July 24 budget, within 6 months we were getting ourselves ready to get that income tax, the new act, ready. So in the process, although the emphasis was more towards simplifying the language, reduce the compliance burden, and also to make it a bit more user-friendly, and not let it be suffering due to various interpretations, which also was sought to be termed as rent-seeking tools. So we were essentially working on that. At that time, as I specified in the July budget, it wasn't talking about rate restructuring. Although, for several years now, we've been looking at the ways in which the rates can be a lot more reasonably taxpayer friendly. And therefore, that work was also going on. Equally, after July budget, there was this voice of the middle class, which felt that they were ending up paying the tax, never mind. They were absolutely proud and happy to be taxpayers of this country, but also felt they don't seem to have much coming in the way of redressing their problems. And there was also this feeling that the government was very inclusive in taking care of the very poor, the poor, also focusing on vulnerable sections and so on. So the voice which came wherever I traveled was, we are proud taxpayers, we are honest taxpayers, we want to be continuing to serve the country by being good taxpayers, but would you think about what are the kind of things you can do for us? And so I had this discussion also with the Honorable Prime Minister, who put me on the specific assignment of see what is it that you can come up with. And therefore we did a bit of within the ministry work and briefed the PM on what is it that is before us, and guided by him we've come up with this.
How much did it take, how much persuasion did it take to get the Prime Minister on board? Or was it just, I know it's a lot more complicated, it's not so simple, but was he like, no, yes, let's go ahead with it?
No, I think your question should be how much did it take for me to convince the ministry, the board. So it is not so much the PM. The PM was very clear that he wants to do something. It is for the ministry to have had the comfort level and then go with the proposal. So the more work that was needed for convincing the board that efficiency in collection and honest taxpayers' voice, all this was work here in the ministry, not so much with the PM. Yesterday in the press conference, the Finance Secretary elaborated as to what is happening. Public sector undertakings were in a very distressed situation even by 2014. Many of them had not even been attended to for a very long time. MTNL is a case in point. BSNL is a case in point. BSNL is not, I'm not suggesting that they are on the privatization list, but I'm saying public sectors have been completely ignored. BSNL was on the verge of suffering badly. It is from 2014 that we've given support to the BSNL repeatedly, as a result of which today they are having their indigenously made 4G, which they are spreading. They also will soon get into 5G is what I'm hearing from the minister. So that is one example. But there are several other public sector undertakings who in the meanwhile, for whatever reason, those which have cabinet approved decisions in favor of disinvestment have also not been left by the wayside. Their valuations have gone up. Today, those very public sector undertakings are doing extremely well because of professional management. So it is one thing to say no disinvestment is happening, but another, please recognize how the PSUs are performing now and their valuations going up. So the disinvestment program, I'm not saying has been kept in the wayside, but the various difficulties that we've had, whether it is COVID, second wave, then came the war, the global markets and their absorption capacities were also severely under stress. So we will continue with our disinvestment program. Rupee's volatility, I've said this before, is against the dollar, whereas rupee has behaved in a far more stable fashion against any other currency. I had said this earlier too, that if the dollar is strengthening and strengthening, the rupee's volatility will be noticeable. RBI also has been looking at the ways in which that it will interfere in the market only to stabilize the rupee for avoiding huge volatility based risks. So we are all closely watching this situation, but for those who don't get into the details of what causes the rupee's volatility
Yeah.
and the depreciation. For those who don't get into the details, yes, it's a very quick argument they can put against the government saying, oh, you're not doing anything much about it. But in today's dollar strengthening environment and with the new US administration, the rupee will have to be understood in as its relationship as against the dollar. The fluctuation which comes as a result of that. So criticisms can come, but those criticisms will also have to go with a response that they should do a bit more study about it rather than quickly comment. I think for want of criticism, they seem to be picking up. I'm sorry to be so blunt.
Yeah.
I've said this even last time when they alleged me of, you're announcing only for your allied partners. Andhra and Bihar are the only two you're naming. Nobody has had anything else coming. I think these are lame and lazy, quick way to look at the budget. Every state gets its share of all the central schemes, gets their due grants in aid, which are decided by the Finance Commission. Every state gets a part of the due for the expressways, the freight corridors, the railways, the airports, and some big ticket seaports, which are also getting built. Each year I don't announce them, but they are funded by us for over several years. Major port projects are never completed within 1 year.
Sure.
So those monies get stopped the next year, when I don't name them? No, it still goes to them. So it's all right for them to have to comment something is fine, but I'd rather want them to go through the details of it and engage constructively.
Yeah.
It is for the states to engage with the Finance Commission, express their concerns about the parameters based on which the tax devolution principles are laid down by each of the Finance Commissions. And if they think over a decade they've had a distinctly different paradigm happening there, it is for them to highlight to the Finance Commission.
Sure.
After all, Government of India takes the Finance Commission's recommendations, particularly on the core suggestions, and follows it. And to then voice concerns as though this Government of India has decided is not a healthy strategy. 3 centers of excellence for AI. They have been specific areas in which we've said these centers of excellence will work towards AI in agriculture, in health, and in urban cities.
Yeah.
Now there's one more which is now been announced for education. So AI is very well being given the support, particularly with identified areas in which we want to extensively use it. Now AI, as you know, is also something which we are encouraging towards skilling. We want people to be skilled to use AI.
Yeah.
So we have come up with a program earlier also, and even now in this budget, hub and spoke model in 5 different parts of the country, where it could be an MSME cluster, where we'll have let's say a skilling center, where in the hub we will have overseas skilling schools which are very good. For example, if I were to say I'll get Singapore to come to one of the clusters for particular areas in which Singapore is well known for training people, skilling people, for them to come and do a master trainers center in that hub, and also have certification provided under their name, to which will be very many more ITIs attached, for whom we have made a provision even in the July budget that in those ITIs we will invest in those equipments which are so needed for training in AI.
Okay.
And the master trainers will then pan out to those centers and train the Yuva from different parts of the country in those particular skills. And for some years, the skilling certification will be given by the overseas training partner, so that the skilling is worth what they have had.
Sure.
So in different parts of the country for different skill sets which are relevant for that particular cluster is something which is aimed at, and that is definitely going to also include training and skilling in AI.